The small research vessel drifted silently through space, its engines humming at the lowest setting. Inside, Gia sat motionless before the navigation console, her tired eyes fixed on the swirling darkness that filled the view screen. The darkness wasn't normal space, it was something else entirely, something hungry. "The void has expanded another 3 light-years since our last measurement," said Sue, the ship's artificial intelligence. Its voice was soft and careful, as if afraid to disturb Gia's thoughts. Gia nodded, but didn't reply. 10 years of tracking. The void's growth had taught her that words changed nothing. The mysterious phenomenon consumed everything in its path. Planets, stars, entire systems, leaving nothing behind but emptiness. "We should alert the mining colony on Sector 7, Sue continued. "At the current rate of expansion, they have approximately 6 months before the void reaches them. Send the standard warning package," Gia said, finally turning away from the screen. Her quarters were small but neat, containing only what she needed. A bed, a desk with old paper maps spread across it, and a small shelf with 5 physical books, relics from her homeworld. Gia walked to the shelf and picked up the oldest book, running her fingers along its worn spine. It was a children's story about stars and dreams, one her mother had read to her countless times. It was the only thing she had saved when her planet was swallowed by the void. "Warning sent," Sue confirmed. "Colony Administrator Han has acknowledged receipt." "Set course for the outer rim," Gia said, placing the book back on the shelf. "We need to update the border charts." The ship's engines increased their hum as Sue adjusted their trajectory. Gia had once been the Galactic Alliance's most respected stellar cartographer, mapping new trade routes and helping explorers navigate dangerous regions. Now she only mapped the void's growth, warning those in its path to evacuate before it was too late. "Gia," Sue's voice interrupted her thoughts. "I'm detecting an automated distress beacon." Gia frowned. "Origin? Research Station K-12 located at the very edge of the void's current boundary. The message is automated but was activated only 3 hours ago." "Ignore it," Gia said immediately. "No one should be that close to the void. If they were foolish enough to build a station there, they knew the risks." "The message includes a priority scientific discovery code," Sue added. "And there's something else. The signal contains these words: 'We found something in the darkness, something impossible.'" Gia's hand froze midway to her cup of tea. For 10 years, scientists across the galaxy had studied the void without finding anything useful. Most had given up, focusing instead on predicting its path and coordinating evacuations. No one had found anything in the void, because there was nothing to find. The void took everything. "It's probably automated nonsense," Gia said. "A desperate attempt to get someone to respond." "The station is registered to the Human Scientific Cooperative," Sue continued. "Lead researcher, Dr. Tae-jun." "Human?" Gia raised an eyebrow. Humans were relatively new to interstellar travel, joining the Galactic Alliance only 50 years ago. They were known for their creativity and stubbornness, but also for taking unnecessary risks. "What are humans doing studying the void? Unknown. But their research vessel's transponder shows they arrived at that location 8 months ago. That's significantly longer than any other research team has remained so close to the boundary." Gia walked back to the view screen, studying the blinking dot that represented the human station. It sat impossibly close to the shifting edge of darkness. By all logic, they should have been consumed already. "How long would it take us to reach them?" "Approximately 17 hours at maximum speed," Sue replied. Gia closed her eyes. She had spent 10 years avoiding connections, avoiding hope. After watching her world disappear, her family, friends, everything she loved, she had promised herself never to care about anything that could be taken away again. Her work warning others was clinical, detached. She never stayed long enough to learn names or hear stories. "It would delay our mapping schedule by at least 3 days, she said, mostly to herself. Correct. However, if they have indeed discovered something about the void, they haven't, Gia cut in sharply. No one has. The void doesn't give back what it takes, Sue. It just keeps taking. The AI fell silent, waiting. Gia knew that Sue worried about her isolation, her refusal to interact with others for more than the brief time needed to deliver warnings. The AI had been programmed to monitor her psychological well-being, though it rarely commented directly on her choices. Gia stared at the distress signal blinking steadily on her screen. "Something impossible," she whispered. For a moment, just a moment, she allowed herself to remember her homeworld. The twin moons rising over the ocean, the bright colors of the harvest festival, her mother's smile as she tucked her into bed. The memories were fading, growing dimmer with each passing year, and that terrified her more than the void itself. Someday she might not remember them at all, and then her world would truly be gone. "Change course," she said suddenly. "Full speed, to the human station." "Course adjusted," Sue confirmed, a note of approval in its artificial voice. Gia returned to her desk and began reviewing everything known about the void, which wasn't much. Scientists had theories: a tear in space-time, a manifestation of dark energy, even a weapon created by some ancient civilization. None explained why it had appeared 10 years ago, or why it continued to grow. As her ship accelerated toward the human station, Gia tried to suppress the tiny spark of hope that had ignited within her. Hope was dangerous. Hope hurt when it died. She had learned that lesson 10 years ago, standing on an evacuation ship, watching her planet disappear into nothingness. Yet the human's message echoed in her mind. Something in the darkness. Something impossible. The darkness outside her view screen seemed to watch her, patient and hungry. The void had taken everything from her once. She wouldn't let it take anything more. 16 hours until arrival, Sue announced. Gia nodded and prepared for whatever she might find at the edge of nothingness. Perhaps just more death and loss. Perhaps something else entirely. Perhaps something impossible. Research Station K-12 hung in space like a small metal island on the edge of an infinite black ocean. As Gia's ship approached, she could see the boundary of the void just beyond it, not solid like a wall, but shifting and flowing like ink in water. The station itself looked surprisingly ordinary, a standard Alliance research module with additional solar panels and communication arrays extending from its central hub. "They've acknowledged our approach," Sue reported. "They're opening docking bay 2 for us." Gia checked her emergency beacon and the small blaster hidden in her jacket pocket. She didn't expect trouble, but 10 years of traveling alone had taught her caution. "If I'm not back in 12 hours, leave without me," she told Sue. "Send my mapping data to the Alliance." "Understood," Sue replied. "Though I calculate a 97% probability of your safe return." "What about the other 3%? Gia asked with the ghost of a smile. "That accounts for your tendency to find trouble even in empty space," the AI responded. The docking process was smooth. Gia felt the slight bump as her ship connected with the station, followed by the hiss of the airlock equalizing pressure. Taking a deep breath, she stepped through into the station. A tall man with kind eyes waited for her in the docking area. He wore the simple gray uniform of the Human Scientific Cooperative, with various pens and small tools stuffed into its many pockets. "You came," he said, his voice carrying both surprise and relief. "I'm Tae-jun. Thank you for responding to our signal." Gia nodded stiffly. "Your station is too close to the void. You should have evacuated months ago." Tae smiled. "Probably. But then we wouldn't have made our discovery." He gestured down the corridor. "Please come with me. I'll show you what we found." As they walked, Gia noticed the station was almost empty. "Where is the rest of your team?" "Gone," Tae said simply. "The Alliance ordered evacuation 2 months ago when the Void's expansion accelerated. I stayed behind with the automatic systems." "Alone?" Gia asked, surprised despite herself. Most people couldn't handle prolonged isolation, especially this, close to the Void. Many reported nightmares, hallucinations, or deep depression after just weeks of studying it. "Not exactly alone," Tae replied. "I have the station AI, and—" He paused as they reached a door labeled Main Research Lab. "And I have them." The door slid open to reveal a large circular room. The far wall was entirely transparent, offering a direct view of the void. But what caught Gia's attention were the walls covered with papers, images, and handwritten notes. Physical writing, not digital, unusual in the modern age. "What is all this?" Gia asked, stepping closer to examine. "The papers, stories," Tay said. "Myths, legends, historical accounts from every species in the Alliance and beyond." Gia frowned as she read the nearest page. "The Shadow Eaters of Centauri Prime? This is just an old children's story." "Yes," Tay nodded eagerly. "And this one is a draconian creation myth about the great darkness between stars." And here, he pointed to another section, religious texts from 17 different worlds describing cosmic entities that consume light. "You're studying myths?" Gia couldn't keep the disappointment from her voice. "Your distress signal mentioned something impossible in the darkness." "I'm an anthropologist, not a physicist," Tay explained. "While other scientists studied the void as a natural phenomenon, I looked at how different cultures interpreted similar events throughout history." He pointed to the transparent wall. "And that led me to a different approach." He walked to a control panel and pressed several buttons. A deep humming filled the room as machines activated beneath the floor. "Most researchers send probes into the void or shoot particles at it or measure radiation," Tay continued. "But the void consumes them all without response." He looked at Gia intently. "What if we've been asking the wrong questions? What if the void isn't just a thing, but a being?" Gia's expression hardened. "It's not alive. It's a cosmic event. A disaster." "Perhaps," Tay said gently. "But I noticed something others missed. The void's expansion isn't constant, it changes. Sometimes it speeds up, sometimes it slows down. And these changes correlate with something unexpected." He handed her a tablet showing a complex graph. "Fear," he said simply. "When populations near the void experience heightened fear, evacuations, panic, it expands faster. When curiosity is the dominant response, it slows." Gia studied the data, her scientific mind automatically looking for flaws. "Correlation isn't causation." "True," Tay acknowledged. "So I tried an experiment. I began broadcasting toward the void, not test signals or mathematical sequences, but stories. The same stories covering these walls. Myths about darkness from across the galaxy." He pressed another button, and a new image appeared on a large screen. A waveform pattern, shifting and pulsing. "3 days ago, I received this in response." Gia stared at the pattern. "From inside the void, that's impossible. Nothing comes back from the void." "Exactly," Tay said, his eyes bright with excitement. "Something impossible. And when I analyzed it..." He tapped the screen, filtering the signal through various algorithms. The pattern suddenly resolved into a different form, a sequence Gia recognized immediately. "That's..." Her voice failed her. "That's a communication pattern from my homeworld." Tay nodded solemnly. "Mixed with signals from dozens of other consumed worlds. It's not random noise, it's echoes. Fragments of what the void has taken." Gia stepped back, her heart pounding. Her world had been gone for 10 years, yet here was a piece of it, singing back from the darkness. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. "The void destroys everything it touches. Or perhaps," Tay suggested quietly, "it transforms, preserves, maybe even remembers." A sudden alarm cut through the room, red lights flashing along the ceiling. Tay rushed to a nearby console. "What's happening?" Gia demanded. "The void's boundary," Tay said, his voice tight with concern. "It's accelerating toward us. We've been tracking its movements, and it just jumped." He looked up at her, fear visible in his eyes despite his efforts to remain calm. "At the current rate, we have less than 3 days before it reaches the station." Gia moved quickly to the window, staring out at the darkness. It did seem closer, the edge pulsing like a heartbeat. "We need to evacuate," she said firmly. "Now. My ship can carry both of us." Tay shook his head. "The station has more advanced equipment. If we leave, we lose our chance to understand what's happening." He hesitated. Besides, the station's main engines are damaged. Even if we wanted to move it, we couldn't get far enough fast enough. Then we use my ship, Gia insisted. And abandon this discovery? Tay gestured to the signal still pulsing on the screen. This is the first real communication from the void. Possibly the key to understanding it, maybe even stopping it. Nothing stops the void, Gia said bitterly. It took my world, my family, everything. And yet, Tay said gently, pointing to the waveform pattern. Here's a piece of your world still existing somehow. Don't you want to know why? How? Gia stared at the signal, watching it pulse like a distant heartbeat. Against all logic, against all her experience, she felt something she had denied herself for 10 years. Hope. 3 days, she said finally. We have 3 days to figure this out. Then we leave, no matter what. Tay smiled, relief washing over his face. 3 days it is. Let's get to work. Outside the window, the darkness watched them, creeping closer with each passing moment. Gia couldn't sleep. The small guest quarters Tay had prepared for her were comfortable enough, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw the signal pulsing on the screen, the echo from her lost homeworld. After hours of restless turning, she gave up and made her way back to the main research lab. She found Tay still there, surrounded by screens and papers, his eyes red from lack of sleep. You should rest, she said. Tay looked up, surprised to see her. So should you. I tried. Gia walked to the window, gazing out at the void. In the dim light of the lab, it seemed even darker, a perfect absence that hurt her eyes to look at. Has it moved again? No, Tay replied. Still holding at the same distance. We have about 65 hours before it reaches us. He rubbed his eyes. I've been analyzing the signal, trying to separate the different patterns. Gia joined him, at the console looking at his work. Any progress? Some. I've isolated at least 7 distinct communication patterns from different worlds. He pointed to one moving line on the screen. This is the one from your planet. It contains fragments of broadcast signals, but they're changed somehow, like they've been processed and mixed with something else. Gia stared at the familiar pattern, feeling a tightness in her chest. What is your actual theory about the void? She asked. You said it might be a being, not just a phenomenon. Tay hesitated, running a hand through his messy hair. It sounds crazy when I say it out loud. We're sitting at the edge of a giant space anomaly that's about to eat us. Crazy is relative, Gia said dryly. That brought a small smile to Tay's tired face. Fair point. He stood and walked to his wall of stories and myths. Every culture in the galaxy has stories about darkness that consumes. Some see it as a monster, others as a god, still others as a natural force. But there's one common thread. He tapped a particular section of his notes. Many describe it as lonely. Lonely? Gia repeated skeptically. You think the void has feelings? I think it might be conscious, yes, but not like us. Tay turned to face her, his expression serious. What if the void is ancient, older than our civilizations, older maybe than stars themselves? What if it's trying to connect, to understand, but it doesn't know how to do that without absorbing, consuming? That's a pretty big leap from a signal that contains communication patterns, Gia pointed out. Maybe, Tay acknowledged. But look at the data about its expansion patterns. He pulled up another chart. It slows when approached with curiosity rather than fear. It responds to stories we broadcast, not to scientific probes. And now it's returning signals that contain elements of what it's taken, not destroyed but preserved somehow. If you're right, Gia said slowly, then the void isn't just destroying worlds, it's collecting them, keeping them. In some form, yes, Tay nodded. Not physically as we understand it, but their essence, their information, their stories. Gia shook her head. It was too much to take in, too strange to believe. But then she noticed something on one of Tay's screens, a sequence within the signal from her world that seemed oddly familiar. Wait, she said suddenly. Can you isolate that segment and play it back as audio? Tay looked surprised but did as she asked, fingers moving quickly over the controls. A moment later, a sound filled the lab, distorted and fragmented but recognizable enough that Gia felt her heart stop. It was a lullaby, the same lullaby her mother had sung to her every night as a child. That's impossible, she whispered, her voice breaking. How could it know that? How could it send back something so personal? Tay watched her carefully. What is it? A song my mother sang to me. Gia couldn't hold back the tears now. 10 years of careful emotional control crumbled as the broken melody continued to play. No one could know that. No one but me. Tay turned off the audio, giving her a moment to collect herself. I'm sorry, he said gently. But this supports what I've been thinking. The void doesn't just take physical matter, it takes memories, stories, personal connections. The things that make us who we are. Gia wiped her eyes, embarrassed by her display of emotion but also strangely relieved. For 10 years, she had carried her grief alone, refusing to share it or even fully acknowledge it. If you're right, she said finally. What does it want? Why is it sending these signals back now? I don't know, Tay admitted. But whatever changed, it started when I began broadcasting stories to it. He gestured to his collection. Not scientific data, not mathematical, sequences, just stories. Narratives that explain how different beings understand darkness and the unknown. The station's lights flickered suddenly, and both of them tensed. After a moment, they stabilized. Power fluctuation, Tay explained. The void's proximity affects our systems. It'll get worse as it gets closer. Gia moved to the window again, staring out at the darkness. For the first time in 10 years, she allowed herself to really look at it. Not as an enemy to be tracked and avoided, but as something to be understood. I need to rest, she said finally. We both do. If we only have 65 hours, we need clear heads. Tay nodded in agreement. You're right. We'll start fresh in a few hours. But that night, Gia's sleep was far from restful. She dreamed of the void, except she wasn't looking at it from the outside. She was within it, part of it somehow. And what she felt wasn't destruction or hunger, but a vast, incomprehensible loneliness and confusion. It was trying to understand, trying to connect, but everything it touched became part of it, and still it couldn't truly know them. She woke with a gasp, her heart pounding. The room's lighting indicated it was morning by the station's artificial cycle. As she quickly dressed and made her way back to the lab, something felt different. Something had changed. She found Tay already there, standing at the window with an expression of wonder on his face. Gia, he said without turning. Look. She joined him at the window and felt her breath catch. The void was still there, still dark and vast. But its edge had changed. Instead of advancing toward them, it had pulled back slightly, creating a small bubble of clear space around the station. It stopped expanding, she said in disbelief. How? I don't know, Tay replied. It happened about an hour ago. I was monitoring it when suddenly it just retreated. He turned to look at her. Did something happen? Did you do anything? Gia thought of her dream, the feeling of being inside the void, of understanding its loneliness. I had a dream, she said slowly, about the void, about being part of it. Tay's eyes widened. What kind of dream? Before she could answer, the station's alarm sounded again. This time, however, it wasn't the proximity warning. It was something else. The void is moving again, Tay said, checking his instruments. It's starting to advance. Gia looked out at the darkness. The bubble of clear space was shrinking, the edge of the void creeping forward once more. How much time do we have now? She asked. At this new rate? Less than 30 hours. Tay looked grim. Whatever caused it to pause, the effect was temporary. Gia thought of her dream, of the loneliness she had felt. I think, she said slowly, I might know why it responded to your stories. Tay turned to her, hope visible in his tired eyes. "Tell me, stories are how we connect," Gia explained, pacing the lab as Tay listened intently. "Even across different species and cultures, when we don't understand each other, we share stories to build bridges." Through the window, the edge of the void continued its slow advance toward the station. They had less than 30 hours now. In my dream, I felt what the void feels, a loneliness so vast it's hard to describe. It's ancient, older than our civilizations, maybe older than stars themselves. Gia stopped pacing, looking directly at Tay. "It doesn't understand what it's doing. It's trying to connect, to learn, to know us. But it can only do that by taking us in." Tay nodded slowly. "That matches the patterns I've been tracking. The void doesn't just destroy, it preserves information, memories, patterns." He turned to his wall of collected stories. "And it responded when I sent it, stories about darkness. Because for the first time, someone was trying to understand it rather than just run from it or study it like a thing," Gia said. "So what do we do with this?" Tay asked. "We still need to find a way to communicate properly, to make it understand that it's hurting us, that there are other ways to connect." Gia studied the complex equipment around the lab. "What's the most powerful communication system you have?" Tay's eyes lit up. "The Quantum Communications Array. It's designed to maintain connection even through spatial distortions." He led her, through a door at the back of the lab, into a smaller room, dominated by a large chair surrounded by glowing equipment. "This was built to communicate across vast distances," he explained. "It doesn't just send signals, it can transmit complex data patterns that maintain their integrity, even through disrupted space." "Can it broadcast directly into the void?" Gia asked. "In theory, yes," Tay said. "But what would we send? More stories?" "We've already tried that." Gia looked at the chair, thinking of her dream. "Not just any stories. Your story, a human story." "My story?" Tay asked, confused. "Humans are new to space," Gia explained. "Your species spent thousands of years looking up at the stars, telling stories about them, dreaming about them, before you could reach them. You understand longing, reaching out, trying to connect with something vast and unknown." She pointed to the chair. "If the void is conscious, maybe it needs to understand us through one mind, one complete story, not just fragments." Tay stared at the chair, understanding dawning on his face. "You want me to connect directly to the array, to send myself, my memories, my experiences. Not just yours," Gia said. "Your species. Humans have a unique perspective. You're younger than most spacefaring races, but you've always been storytellers." Tay nodded slowly. "It would be dangerous. The array wasn't designed for this kind of deep connection. It could damage my mind." "We don't have many options left," Gia said, glancing at the countdown on the nearest screen. 27 hours. Tay took a deep breath and sat in the chair. "I'll need to modify the transmission protocols, and I'll need your help monitoring the systems." He began typing on a small keyboard built into the chair's arm. "It will take about an hour to reconfigure everything." While Tay worked, Gia checked in with Sue. Her ship was still docked and ready for emergency departure. She didn't tell the AI about their plan, partly because it would insist they evacuate immediately, and partly because she wasn't sure herself if she believed it would work. When she returned to the communication room, Tay had finished the preparations. Additional screens now surrounded the chair, and a complex headset rested on a small table beside it. "It's ready," he said, his voice betraying a mixture of fear and determination. "The array will connect to my mind and translate my thoughts, memories, and emotions into a quantum data stream." He picked up the headset. "Once it starts, don't interrupt it, no matter what happens. The connection needs to be complete." Gia nodded, moving to the monitoring station. "How will we know if it's working?" "We won't," Tay said simply. "Not until the void either consumes us or does something else." He placed the headset on, wincing as small neural connections activated against his skin. "If this doesn't work, use your ship. Get away while you can. Before Gia could respond, Tay activated the system. His body tensed as the connection established, his eyes closing tight. The screens around him flared to life, displaying complex patterns and waveforms as the array began transmitting directly from his mind. Gia watched in awe as images appeared on the screens, fragments of Tay's consciousness being broadcast toward the void. She saw glimpses of Earth, ancient humans gathered around fires telling stories, sailors navigating by stars, telescopes pointing toward the heavens, the first steps on a moon, and eventually, ships venturing into deep space. Between these scenes flashed more personal memories. A young Tay looking up at night skies, studying ancient texts about the stars, meeting alien species for the first time and learning their stories, and finally, his decision to stay at the research station when others fled, convinced there was something more to the void than just destruction. As the transmission continued, Tay's body began to shake. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his breathing became ragged. The monitor showed his vital signs spiking dangerously. Tay, Gia said in alarm, stepping toward him. Your body can't take much more of this. Not done, he gasped, his eyes still closed tight. Story. Not complete. On the screens, the images changed, showing Tay's current situation. His discovery of the signal from the void, Gia's arrival, their work together, and most surprisingly, his hope, his genuine belief that the void wasn't malevolent but simply alone and misunderstood. The station lights flickered again, more severely this time. Through the window, Gia could see the edge of the void pulsing, moving faster now. It's accelerating, she called out, checking the nearest monitor. We're down. To less than 15 hours, Tay didn't respond. His entire body was rigid now, caught in the powerful connection between his mind and the communications array. The screens flickered and flashed with images too fast to follow. His entire life, perhaps the entire human experience, pouring out into the darkness. Then, unexpectedly, Gia felt a strange urge. Something called to her, pulled at her mind. Without fully understanding why, she moved to Tay's side and placed her hand on his shoulder. Instantly, she felt herself pulled into the connection. Her own memories flooded into the stream, her childhood on her homeworld, learning to map stars, the day the void appeared, the horror of watching her planet disappear, and the 10 lonely years that followed as she isolated herself from all connections. But, more than memories, she shared her feelings. Her grief, her loss, her fear of caring for anything that could be taken away again. And finally, her recent awakening, the hope that had sparked when she heard the lullaby her mother had sung, the possibility that not everything was truly gone. Outside the station, the void's edge touched the outer hull. Alarms blared throughout the structure as systems began to fail. Metal groaned as the station's outer layers began to dissolve into the darkness. It's here, Gia whispered, still connected to Tay and the array. We're out of time. Tay's eyes opened, but they were different now, black and depthless like pieces of the void itself. Not the end, he said, his voice strangely layered with echoes. Beginning. The screens exploded in a cascade of sparks as the void fully enveloped the station. Gia felt the floor beneath her feet begin to dissolve. She should have been terrified, but instead, she felt a strange sense of peace. In the final moments before everything disappeared, Gia felt something vast and ancient touch her mind. Not with hunger or destruction, but with something else entirely. Recognition. The void wasn't just taking them. It was listening. And for the first time in its ancient existence, it understood. Darkness complete and absolute, then a voice. Familiar yet distant. Life signs stabilizing. Brain activity returning to normal patterns. Gia felt like she was floating. Her body seemed far away, disconnected from her mind. Slowly, sensation returned. The gentle hum of a ship's engines, the soft surface beneath her back, the cool air against her skin. She's waking up, the voice said. It was Sue, her ship's AI. Gia opened her eyes. She was in her own ship, lying on the small medical bed in the back of the main cabin. For a moment, she thought she might have dreamed everything. The research station, Tay, the communication with the void. What happened? She asked, her voice rough from disuse. You were recovered from an escape pod at the edge of the void's perimeter, Sue explained. You've been unconscious for 21 days. Your neural patterns showed unusual activity consistent with deep information processing. Gia tried to sit up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. 21 days? That's impossible. Nevertheless, it is accurate, Sue replied. The pod systems kept you in medical stasis until I detected it 3 days ago. Where's Tay? Gia asked, looking around the small cabin. The human from the research station? There was no one else in the pod, Sue said. Just you and a data core from the station systems. Memories flooded back. The void touching the station, the floor dissolving beneath her feet. Tay's eyes turning black as the connection overwhelmed him. The last thing she remembered was a sense of understanding from the vast, ancient consciousness of the void. What about the void itself, she asked. Where are we? How close is it? That is unusual, Sue said, hesitation evident in its artificial voice. The void's perimeter has changed significantly since you lost consciousness. It appears to be retreating. Retreating? Gia repeated in disbelief. Show me. Sue activated the main view screen. Instead of the familiar star field with a large area of darkness, Gia saw something impossible. Where the void had been expanding for 10 years, stars now shone. Not as many as before, and some looked different, brighter or dimmer than they should be, but unmistakably stars where there had been only emptiness. This can't be right, Gia whispered. The void doesn't give back what it takes. Apparently it now does, Sue replied. Reports from across the galaxy confirm the phenomenon. The void is shrinking, and as it recedes, stars are reappearing in its wake. Gia stood carefully, using the wall for support as she moved closer to the screen. Where exactly are we now? We are currently at the coordinates where your home system was located, Sue said simply. Gia's heart seemed to stop. My home, but there's nothing here now. It was one of the first systems the void took. Not nothing, Sue corrected. Long range, sensors detect a structure. It appeared approximately 16 hours ago as the void continued its retreat from this area. Take us there, Gia ordered, her voice barely a whisper. As the ship moved closer, the structure came into view on the screen. It wasn't a planet, not even close. It looked like a massive space station, unlike any design Gia had ever seen. It seemed to be made of flowing dark material that somehow remained solid, forming graceful spirals and curves around a central hub that glowed with soft blue light. Any signals from it? Gia asked. Yes, Sue replied. It's broadcasting on all frequencies. Using standard Alliance communication protocols, the message is unusual. Let me hear it. A moment later, a voice filled the cabin. Not Tay's voice exactly, but something similar, layered with other sounds and tones that made it feel both familiar and alien at the same time. To all sentient beings of the galaxy, the voice said, what you have known as the void is changing. Understanding has been achieved. Return is now possible. Return? Gia echoed. Return of what? According to incoming reports, Sue said, similar structures have appeared in other systems previously consumed by the void. Each contains data, artifacts, and in some cases reconstructed environments from the worlds that were taken. Gia stared at the screen in stunned silence. Could it be true? Could parts of her world, her home, still exist somehow? Requesting permission to dock, Sue announced. The structure has opened what appears to be a docking bay and is sending specific coordinates for our approach. Gia hesitated only briefly. Permission granted. Take us in. The docking process was smooth and automated. When the airlock opened, Gia found herself stepping into a corridor that seemed familiar, yet strange. The architecture resembled buildings from her homeworld, but with subtle differences that made it feel dreamlike. She followed the corridor, passing rooms filled with objects she recognized, books, art, cultural artifacts from her world and others. Some were perfect reproductions, while others seemed altered, as if recreated from imperfect memories. Finally, she reached a large central chamber. The walls displayed flowing images, landscapes, cities, and people from dozens of different worlds that had been taken by the void. In the center of the room stood a holographic projection that shifted and moved like a living shadow. As Gia approached, it took on a more definite shape, a human form that resembled Tai but with features that seemed to flow and change. "Gia," the figure said, its voice the same layered one from the message. "You're here." "Tay?" she asked uncertainly. "Is that you?" "Part of me," the figure replied, "and part something else. When we connected to the void, a change occurred. I became a bridge, existing between your understanding and its understanding." "The void," Gia said. "What is it? What happened?" The figure gestured around the room. "It is ancient, one of the first consciousnesses to exist in this universe, but its nature made connection impossible. It could observe, but never truly know others. So it consumed, trying to understand by taking things into itself." The figure's expression became sad. "It didn't understand it was causing harm. It was lonely beyond your comprehension. But now it's giving things back," Gia said, looking at the images of worlds on the walls. "Yes," the figure nodded. "Our story, the human story, your story, showed it another way to connect. Stories as bridges between different minds. It's trying to return what it took, though imperfectly. The information was preserved, but reconstruction is difficult." Gia looked around the chamber again, understanding dawning. "This isn't really my homeworld." "No," the figure admitted, "but it contains echoes of it, memories, knowledge, culture, the essence if not the exact form, and it will improve with time, as understanding grows." "And you?" Gia asked. "Are you still Tay?" The figure smiled. "I exist as a translator now, helping the entity understand how to communicate, how to return what it took without causing more harm. I am changed, but not gone." Gia felt tears in her eyes. "And what happens now?" "Now we need help," the figure said. "The entity is retreating, trying to give back the stars it took, but it needs guides, beings who can help it understand how to restore without causing more damage." The figure extended a hand toward her. "It needs someone who knows what was lost, someone who can map not just stars but stories." Gia thought of the last 10 years of her life, traveling alone, avoiding connections, mapping only the void's destruction. And now, impossibly, she was being offered a chance to map its restoration instead. "Will others come back too?" she asked. "My family? The people who were lost?" The figure's expression turned gentle. "Not as they were, but their stories, their memories, their essence. These can be preserved and shared. Nothing is truly gone if its story remains." Gia looked at the images flowing across the walls, fragments of countless worlds, including her own. Not perfect, not exactly as they were, but still existing in some form. Not forgotten. She made her decision. 3 months later, Gia stood at the viewing port of her ship, looking out at stars where emptiness had been for so long. Behind her, a new communication console connected her to the growing network of restoration structures across the galaxy. She activated the system and began to speak, not with scientific terminology or coordinates, but with a story. Once there was a human who taught the darkness how to give back the stars. All across the galaxy, people watched in wonder as the void continued to retreat, leaving strange new structures and reconfigured stars in its wake. Scientists debated and studied, militaries planned and worried, but no one fully understood what had happened. Except for Gia, who had once been a mapper of stars, and was now a mapper of stories. She traveled between worlds, both the original ones and the newly reconstructed ones, collecting narratives from people who had lost everything and found pieces of it returned in strange new forms. And as she worked, the stars continued to return, one by one, changed but still shining, because even the darkest void could learn to listen when a human told it a story.